Ah, Robo Cop, such a brilliant film. Not that 2014 film though, that was pish. No, I'm talking about the 1987 film directed by Paul Verhoeven and starring Paul Weller and Nancy Allen. Set in a crime-ridden Detroit in the near future, Robocop centres on police officer Alex Murphy, who is murdered by a gang of criminals but revived by the mega corporation Omni Consumer Products as the cyborg law enforcer Robocop. And unaware of his former life, Robocop executes a campaign against crime while coming to terms with the lingering fragments of his humanity. Now, I have to say, Verhoeven certainly emphasised violence throughout the film, making it so outlandish that it became a bit comical. And censorship boards believed that it was too extreme, and as a result, several scenes were either shortened or modified to receive an acceptable rating for the theatre. Robocop was a financial success upon its release in July 1987, earning $53 million. Reviewers praised it as a clever action film with deeper philosophical messages and satire, but were conflicted about its extreme violence. The film was nominated for several awards and won an Academy Award and a number of Saturn Awards. And Robocop has been critically re-evaluated since its release, and it has been hailed as one of the best films of the 1980s and one of the greatest science fiction and action films ever made. The film has been praised for its depiction of a robot affected by the loss of humanity, in contrast to the stoic and emotionless robotic characters of that era. Robocop has continued to be analysed for its themes such as the nature of humanity, personal identity, corporate greed and corruption, and is seen as a rebuke of the era's Reaganomics policies. You know, Ronald Reagan, that fella. And Robocop's success created a franchise. The sequels Robocop 2 in 1990 and Robocop 3 in 1993. Then there was the children's animated series, live action television shows, comic books, toys, clothing, and of course video games. And that brings us on to our games that we're going to be discussing today. In my video, we'll start by looking at the 1988 arcade game, and then we'll look at the various ports or conversions that were released afterwards, including Robocop 2, Robocop 3, Robocop vs Terminator, and so on. I'll also give you my top 5 ranked games at the end. So, without further ado, let's look at the complete history of Robocop. Dead or alive, you're coming with me.
Serve the public trust, protect the innocent, uphold the law.
So, I thought we would start by looking at the arcade game of Robocop. This arcade game of Robocop was sub-licensed by Data East by Ocean Software, who obtained the rights from Orion Pictures at the script stage. I think Ocean got the rights for something like $20,000, which is really peanuts. And Data East, well, they published the game for the arcades in 1988. So, Robocop is a single-player, horizontally scrolling platform, run and gun and beat 'em up, similar to Data East's arcade game, Bad Dudes vs Dragon Ninja, which was released earlier the same year. The story of the game mirrors that of the film, with former city cop Alex Murphy, who gets killed by the thugs and resurrected as a half-human cyborg called Robocop, on a mission to bring down the evil OCP corporation that created him. Right, the action in Robocop takes place over 7 levels, interspersed with a couple of bonus levels too. The game remains pretty much the same throughout. Robocop wanders through the levels shooting just about anybody who gets in his way, bar a few hostages who he can free by shooting their captors. Now, he can fire in 8 directions, up, down, left, right and diagonally. And when he's close with an enemy, well, he can give him a smack with his metal-clad arm. Robocop's standard gun has unlimited ammo, but he can pick up collectibles to enhance his weapons. These do things like fire laser-like bullets, multi-directional ammo, and the usual kind of stuff. However, these usually come with limited ammunition. See, there's always a downside to your fun, isn't there? Now, Robocop can also pick up other guns with more explosive and devastating firepower. Enemies fire at you from all directions and different enemies have different attacks also. You will get used to their attacks quickly, but things also become relentless quite quickly with numerous enemies positioning themselves everywhere. They aren't particularly difficult to defeat, but it is clearing them all off the screen that's the issue. Even so, with a bit of skillful firing, ducking and diving, you can put paid to their hostiles in quite a satisfying way. Then, a boss battle awaits you at the end of each level. Again, once you've learned the patterns and their weak points, defeating most of them isn't difficult, although some of the later ones really do hammer your power bar. And during the boss battles you can also see your enemy's power bar, so you know how close you are to defeating it. Now, with regards to the bonus level features, there are 2 in the game. This is a chance to earn some extra points, get some target practice and increase your power capacity. The bonus level takes the form of a shooting gallery, with you simply having to fire at targets with a set time limit. It's nothing too challenging, or that exciting to be honest, but it's there. Most of the early levels scroll left to right, with the last couple of levels going upwards as you make use of lifts to get higher in a building. These are probably my least favourite levels, I have to say. After a fast-paced action-packed build-up, the final 2 levels are a bit of a letdown. You clear a floor of enemies and what appear to be armed security cameras. Then you take a lift to the next floor up to repeat the process. And you do this over and over again. However, ignoring the tedium of the last couple of levels and their never-ending lifts, the game is pure and simple arcade gaming, with little to divert your attention, and just getting on with firing in all directions and ridding the levels of enemies. And the presentation and graphics are great also. Each level captures its scene well, and quick intermissions tell the story. The characters are well animated and are also quite big and bold. Okay, fine, there is a bit of slowdown when the action gets too intense, but this is quite rare. Although dark and moody, the graphics also have a fair amount of colour in them to give vibrancy to each of the levels. And also, I liked the soundtrack. It was fantastic, with music and sound effects that really suit the style of the game. There's also a good amount of sampled speech in the game, with Robocop saying his famous sayings and generally being quite a chatty Robocop thing. Oh yes, this is a game that showcased some of what the technology at the time could do. It was nothing extra spectacular, but it was very good. And more importantly, Robocop plays well. Controls are simple and responsive, with shooting, jumping and firing working as it needs to. Being made of metal, our Tin Man isn't really able to jump that high and isn't the quickest of movers, which can get a bit frustrating when you want him to get out of the way of enemy fire. One minor, slight frustration is that the direction he's aiming in sticks sometimes, so you have to re-aim to hit your required target. Another problem with the game is that, especially later on, you can lose your life within seconds of continuing. Although this was obviously so that people getting towards the end of the game would spend more money and continue, it does sometimes feel a bit unfair though. It's as if you're not given a chance to use skill to battle yourself out of this situation. Instead, you're paying your way out of it. Keep hitting that continue and you'll slowly but surely get through. That said, the game isn't impossible and you can get quite far on one life if you try, something I couldn't really do when I was younger. However, Robocop is definitely a quality arcade game. It's better at the beginning, sure, than it is towards the end. It's completely mindless and it is lacking in depth, but it offers a good fix of running and gunning action if that's your thing. And finally, the arcade game was a critical and commercial success. It was the highest grossing arcade game of 1988 in Hong Kong, and it reached number 2 on the Japan's monthly game machine arcade charts. So, there you go. And as Robocop would say, thank you for your cooperation.
Thank you for your cooperation.
Ocean Software presents Robo Cop, part man, part machine, all computer game. You've seen the smash movie, played the all-action coin-op, now experience the thrills on your home computer. As Robo Cop, you blast through the many levels of the underworld in the pursuit of justice. Scrolling shoot-'em-up action. You've got to be tough, ruthless, and lethal. You've got to be Robo Cop.
During development of the arcade game in 1988, Ocean worked on bringing the computer version of the property to 8-bit home computers, converting what was made available to them at the time, while also adding original content to make it different from the arcade original. This version was produced for the Commodore 64, the MSX, ZX Spectrum, and the Amstrad CPC and the MS-DOS. There was also ports for the Apple II, the Amiga, the Atari ST, and ports for the DOS, NES and TRS-80 Color Computer 3 followed in 1989. The Apple II and IBM PC ports were developed by Quicksilver Software, while the Amiga and Atari ST versions were developed directly by Ocean. The NES version was also developed primarily by Data East, with programming handled by Sakata at SAS Co., and Ocean ported and published a version for the Game Boy also in 1990. I also believe that a port of the game for the Atari Jaguar was planned, but that was never released. So, anyway, let's have a look at all these early games of Robocop, starting with the ZX Spectrum version.
Robocop. Serve the public trust. Protect the innocent. Uphold the law.
Now, recently I have been doing a few movie tie-in games, and I have to say the movie license is definitely a funny creature. Some have been pretty good, and some have just been pure garbage. In my experience, one of two things happens with a licensed game. Either you have a really good idea for a game and use a recognisable character to give it credibility, and then seek the license, or you seek a license and then try your darnest to think of a winning game. Actually, what happens in most cases is that you don't bother to think of a winning game and just hope that the name on it will sell it. Now, I've recently reviewed a few of the Ocean Software licensed games, including the Untouchables, Rambo, Cobra and the Batman game. And I have to say, they were all pretty good and are fine examples of how to do the job properly. But it's certainly better than that Knight Rider they'd done. More like Shite Rider. Anyway, Ocean Software were, for a very long time, considered quite rightly to be one of the best, if not the best software houses for converting a movie license to a more than reasonable game. So, with this in mind, I was optimistic for Robocop. Was the ZX Spectrum game any good? Well, Christ, who knew what was going to happen when the Specky version was released? I mean, rare reviews all around. The game topped the charts for 18 months, entering in April 1989 and still being in the top 5 in February 1991. And I have to say, the music is very good in the release, and the title music was also used by White Goods Company Artisan in a series of famous TV adverts. Nice advert.
And on. And Ariston. And on. And on.
And also, it wasn't just the music, but the speech, which was so good it was a feature in itself too. And not to mention, you also get to shoot a lot of people. Good times. Now, there were two ZX Spectrum versions of this game. Owners of the 48K version endure the inconvenience of multi-loading, 3 loads in fact, while fortunate 128K owners receive the entire package in one seamless megaload, complete with impressive sound effects. Again, at the core of this captivating game lies the story of Alex Murphy, our courageous Detroit cop who meets a tragic fate at the hands of the local gang. Transformed into the ultimate cybernetic law enforcement Tin Man, Robocop embarks on a mission to rid the city of crime and bring justice to those who have caused chaos. As players navigate through each stage, they must confront criminals, battle the fearsome Ed 209 machines, and ultimately face off against the notorious Dick Jones, the Senior Vice President of OCP. Now, it's essential to clarify that Robocop isn't merely a coin-op conversion. While Ocean was developing the game, the coin-op was also in progress, making a direct conversion impractical. Instead, the directive was to take the best bits from the coin-op and add some extra flair. And Ocean certainly delivered. Just like the arcade version in most levels, Robocop walks from left to right, shooting his gun at hordes of punks that intend to kill him with bullets, chainsaws or their fists. Now I have to say, Robocop on the ZX Spectrum impresses with its initiative, controls and responsive gameplay mechanics. Players can effortlessly manoeuvre Robocop through the levels, utilising a variety of actions such as shooting, crouching, punching and aiming diagonally to take down enemies on different planes. Now, it's important to carefully manage ammunition, as running out of bullets can leave you defenceless and vulnerable, forcing you to rely solely on hand-to-hand combat. So the strategic balance between shooting and conserving ammo adds an exciting layer of challenge to this game. Stages include Streets of Detroit, which is in 2 parts based on the first level of the arcade, a drug factory based on the 4th arcade level, and a junkyard based on the 3rd coin-op stage. Gun power-ups to collect include a rapid fire model, a 3-way shot and a powerful flame cannon. 2 levels end with boss fights against Robocop's chief adversary, Ed 209. And for some reason, Ed is impervious to bullets and can only really be defeated using Robo's fists. And to further enhance the gaming experience, Robocop features captivating mini-games inspired by pivotal scenes from the original film. These mini-games seamlessly blend into the overarching narrative, providing players with moments of variety and additional challenges. In one memorable sequence, Robocop must rescue a woman held at knife point while avoiding any harm to her. Another minigame involves matching criminals' faces to identify them, testing your memory and attention to detail. And the final showdown with Dick Jones takes the form of first-person target challenge, where precision and accuracy are paramount. Certainly there are similarities to this game and to the arcade version. Now I have to say, Robocop on the ZX Spectrum treats players to remarkable auditory experience. The game boasts impressive sound effects that bring the action to life, immersing players in the thrilling world of crime fighting as Robocop. And of course, additionally, there's the iconic game music composed by Jonathan Dunn, which has become legendary in its own right, evoking nostalgia and capturing the essence of the Robocop universe. The combination of immersive sound effects and an unforgettable soundtrack elevates the overall atmosphere of the game, leaving a lasting impression on the players. And with regards to the challenge, well, Robocop strikes an exquisite balance between difficulty and enjoyment. While some games on the ZX Spectrum era tended to be overwhelmingly challenging, Robocop manages to provide an engaging and satisfying experience without sacrificing difficulty. This delicate equilibrium ensures that players can progress through the game while still encountering a suitable level of challenge. Whether you're revisiting the game with a sense of nostalgia or discovering it for the first time, Robocop offers an enduring appeal that will captivate retro gaming enthusiasts at all ages. I have to say, I enjoyed the ZX Spectrum game. And you know, on the home computers, the game sold over 1 million copies worldwide. It was especially successful in the United Kingdom, where it was the best-selling home computer game of the 1980s. The ZX Spectrum version in particular was the best-selling home computer game of 1989. The ZX Spectrum Robocop was one of the biggest selling games of all time on that platform, and remained in the Spectrum software charts for over a year and a half. I mean, as I said, it entered the charts in December 1988 and was still in the top 5 in February 1991. Robocop also topped the UK all-format charts for a record 36 weeks until it was knocked off the number 1 position by Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade in August 1989. The ZX Spectrum version also achieved critical acclaim, receiving a Crash Smash Award from Crash, 94% in Sinclair user, and your Sinclair gave 8.8 out of 10, also placing it at number 94 in your Sinclair official Top 100. Robocop for the ZX Spectrum has cemented its status as a true classic among gaming enthusiasts. Its combination of captivating gameplay, impressive visuals and immersive audio design creates an experience that stands the test of time. For me, whether you're a dedicated fan of the original film or simply seeking a thrilling and rewarding gaming experience, then Robocop and the ZX Spectrum delivers on all fronts. Taking into consideration of the specky hardware back then, I loved this game and in fact I still like it today. Right, now we're on to the Commodore 64 version. Oh dear. Although the Commodore 64 offers a wide range of wonderful, cleverly coded games, a few titles were just rushed during development. Despite the great sound and graphics capability of the Commodore 64 for the time, some games indeed offered bad graphics and or music, while others were more or less plain unplayable. But sometimes weird things did happen. Some games were apparently cool, but they had some nasty things hiding inside them. Robocop by Ocean is one of those games. The Commodore 64 Robocop game by Ocean was clearly rushed during development. They just needed to get the game on the market as soon as possible so they could rely on the success of the movie. And I think this game sold well, at least at the beginning, but it just didn't offer the quality that one could expect for such an important title. Developers did start with the idea of creating a good game. The music is certainly very good and the graphics offer colourful detailed sprites thanks to the high-res sprites overlay technique. The music by John Dunn certainly offers quite complex sounds in my opinion, way above the average Commodore 64 music of the time. But sadly things start to turn out wrong since the very beginning. Right after you press the fire button to start the game and you suddenly pull the joystick to move the main character to the right, you immediately notice that Robocop just slides too fast towards the right. And then, after you play the game for some seconds, you suddenly realise that the difficulty level is set way too high. You just have one life and your energy runs out very quickly as soon as you get hit by enemies. Yes, you can eat baby food to get some energy back, but still, it's not easy to keep your energy level high. Another odd thing is that you are not able to fire upwards without jumping. That just makes the game even more difficult as you can get shot more easily because of this problem. Level 2 is quite infamous. It's not easy to get the hostage free as excellent shooting is required to kill the bad guy. The time limit is so little that even if you manage to accomplish your task, you're hardly able to get any seconds left. I don't think I managed to end up with more than 4 or 5 seconds left. I can certainly pass the level now, but I remember it being very difficult back in the time. Maybe the developers made that level nearly impossible to complete on purpose, so that you couldn't find the other bugs that were waiting for you in the remaining parts of the game. Anyway, the trick to be successful in this level is to set the proper height of the sight very quickly, then keep shooting at the face of the criminal, carefully trying to mimic his movements. And of course, don't shoot at the hostage, otherwise you'll lose energy. Level 3 is not very difficult, but it can get very frustrating due to the motorbikes. If you don't have the right kind of weapon, shooting at them effectively can turn out to be a nightmare. The infamous 3 shots weapon just seems to be unsuitable for that, so try to avoid getting it if possible. And then, in an effort to find out who killed his former self, on level 4 Robocop must complete an identikit. Again, the time limit is very tight and you're only allowed a fixed amount of mistakes. But usually, failing to complete this part doesn't prevent you to reach the following level. Graphics seem to be quite good and it makes use of the high res mode, however some details are missing and there is no animation when you complete the match. Level 5 is just a nightmare and I never managed to complete it. I just find it way too difficult as it is very easy to get shot by enemies while going upwards or downwards. Still, if you happen to touch an enemy, you lose a lot of energy. And to escape from the factory, you have to hit a wall repeatedly. With cheats, I had a look at the remaining levels. Level 6 seems to be quite hard as you have a battle against the terrifying Ed 209 with your bare hands. But level 7 is just what makes the game impossible to complete, as it is completely bugged. You just can't see any programmable characters made graphics, you only see sprites and a lot of garbage on the screen. I mean, bloomin' heck, it's just unbelievable that they put a game on the market with such a big bug. I'm pretty well convinced that that's what they were trying to hide by setting the difficulty level so high on previous levels. They clearly didn't want you to reach this faulty level. They were just on money, and instead of delaying the release of the game, they decided to release it unfinished. They simply couldn't allow the importance of the movie to fade, otherwise sales wouldn't have been as strong as they needed. They just couldn't care of the honour of the Commodore 64 here. Thankfully, levels 8 and 9 don't have any big bugs. And the game ending seems to be quite disappointing, however. Still, on level 9, if you kill the hostage, graphics gets corrupted. The overall difficulty and the bug on level 7 just make the game nearly impossible to complete. I am aware that there are some fixed versions of the game which were released without those bugs, but still. So for me, I was disappointed with the Commodore 64 game. Just rubbish. Okay, now we're on to the MSX version. Okay, Robocop may not please die-hard MSX owners, but the absence of colour proves acceptable, with speed needing to be kept up. Now, this is really a clone of the brilliant ZX Spectrum version. There is no speech, but the music is very similar and faithful as a conversion of the Spectrum tune. The speed is also slightly slower compared to the Specky, but it does have similar controls. It's an okay game. Let's have a look. The Amstrad version is very similar to the Commodore 64 version, but with more colour and certainly less bugs. The speed of this game is very fast and the controls are pretty good. However, those staircases can be both tricky and a little bit annoying. The game also has the same minigames that we saw in the ZX Spectrum and the Commodore 64, and it also has very good sampled speech. However, what the version does have, it only has 3 lives and it has no continues, so it is a tougher challenge. Anyway, let's have a look at the game. Now, the arcade Robocop game was used as a basis for the Atari ST, the Amiga and the Apple II ports. Both the Atari ST and the Amiga were released in 1989. That's 2 years after the arcade game and 1 year after the computer versions. These are both surrounded by a border, making the playing field smaller. The graphics also have been redrawn and look strangely colourful compared to the relatively gritty look of the arcade game. There are also brief cutscenes showing news reports using digitised actors from the movie. I like that. Now, both the Atari ST and the Amiga versions are on the slow side, but otherwise they are okay ports. Let's have a look at the Amiga version first.
Serve the public trust. Protect the innocent. Uphold the law.
Firstly, Paul Weller's voice from the movie is not actually in this game. Instead, there was a sound-alike, which sounds like it was recorded in someone's bathroom. And he also appears to have a British accent, which is a little bit strange. The border I mentioned certainly makes the game look and feel a little bit smaller. And as I said, the game also follows the arcade game design more than it does the 8-bit versions. The colourful graphics are really well done and with good animation, particularly on Robocop himself. And as I already mentioned, there are brief cutscenes showing news reports using digitised actors from the movie. The sound effects are good with digitised samples such as Robo's gun and the cries from Ed 209. However, the music is nothing too special to shout about. It's okay, I mean the main theme's okay, but I have to say the Amiga is capable of much more. Let's have a look at the game. Now we're on to the Atari ST version, which is very similar to the Amiga version. Although I have to say the music and sound effects have taken a hit here. And this version is also slightly slower than the Amiga port, but the controls are much the same. There are also fewer voice samples in the game too compared to the Amiga version, otherwise it's not too bad. Let's have a look. Right, so here we are, we're on the Apple II version, and I have to say, this port doesn't look brilliant. It has choppy movement and a screen that incrementally scrolls when you reach the edge. I mean, these graphics are blocky and chunky, but there is plenty of colour. Again, this version is slower than the arcade game, but the controls are okay. Disappointingly, there is no music, and the sound effects are bleeps and farts, but I suppose since the Atari ST hardware wasn't conductive for games, it does the best it can. Let's have a look. Now, there were two different versions that were produced for the MS-DOS. There's a European version, which is rendered in pink, cyan, black and white. It also has that large border around it again, and I have to say I'm not a big fan of the colour scheme in this game either. The game design is based on the 8-bit games, with the minigames also added, but for me this version doesn't play anywhere near as well, to be honest. And there is no music, and just the odd beeps for the sound effects. Anyway, let's have a look. Now, the American version was released a couple of years later by Data East, and it's a much better version compared to the European version. In this game, well, it follows the arcade game more than it does the 8-bit computer games. And while the colours are brighter compared to the arcade version, the game layout is designed very similar to the arcade game. I have to say I like the animation, although the scrolling is a little bit choppy. The American version does have the same end of level bosses, but the sound effects are all beeper sounds. And blimey, the music, it certainly grates on you. Christ, just turn it off. However, in saying all that, this is certainly a much better version compared to that shitty European version. Let's have a look. A version was also released for the TRS-80 Color Computer 3 by Data East, and it looks similar to the NES version, which we're just about to look at too. The first thing I did notice about this version is the animation, with the notable fewer frame rates while he was walking. In fact, I think there's only 2 frame rates. And again, what is with the music? Jesus, depressing. Let's have a look. The NES version was developed in Japan by Data East, and it seems to be mostly remembered because despite being a side-scroller, Robocop cannot actually jump. And it's not intentionally restriction like Bionic Commando was, there's just no use for it here in this game. Instead, the 2 face buttons are used for punching and shooting when you get your gun. And weirdly in some areas you can use your gun but in others you can't. It seems totally arbitrary. In addition to your health, you're also facing off against a dwindling time meter, so you need to be both hustle and occasionally walk out of your way to get replenishment items. The levels are totally different from the other games, but again similar in theme. There are still some scenes where the bad guys take hostages, but still from a side view, and unlike the arcade game, you actually need to avoid shooting the good guys here. As far as a licensed NES game goes, Robocop isn't terrible, but it's not exactly good either. There are only 2 songs in the game, a short rendition of the movie theme and a boss tune, and they both get old extremely fast. And also what I noticed in this game, for such a powerful character like Robocop, he just looks and feels far too weak. I mean, he's skinny and crappily animated and his punches have no real reach. And shooting those bloody dogs is more difficult than it should be as well, since it's easy to accidentally fire downward instead of kneeling. The cutscene visuals aren't great, but the text interludes are hilarious. The game over screen reads, "Robocop is never discouraged, let's challenge again." And also, upon reenacting the end of the movie, this is when Robocop kills the OCP President Dick Jones as bloodlessly as possible. The end screen reads, "Thank you for your cooperation, stay out of trouble." Very good. Let's have a look at the game. Now, I was actually surprised with the Game Boy version, and I actually think this is probably the better of all the 8-bit versions. The music is good and quite catchy actually, although it was a shame that they didn't include the Robocop theme. But saying all that, the graphics are well done, with good Robocop animation. Everything stands out pretty well on the little Game Boy screen. The arcade's minigames are also present. It's a pretty good version, let's have a look. Now, Ocean retained the Robocop license for all the subsequent console and computer versions. Now, Robocop 2 the game is based on the 1990 film in which Robocop must stop a drug distributor, Kane, from spreading a new drug known as Nuke. And the game, well, it was released on several platforms, including the Amiga, Amstrad GX4000, the Atari ST, Commodore 64, Game Boy, Nintendo Entertainment System and the ZX Spectrum. The Amiga and Atari ST versions were developed by Special FX and published by Ocean Software, which also developed the NES and Game Boy versions. The Game Boy and Nintendo Entertainment System versions are primarily shoot-'em-up games. They differ from the Amiga, the Amstrad GX4000 and the Commodore 64 versions, which also differ from each other. In addition to side-scrolling platform levels, the Amiga and ZX Spectrum versions include other levels consisting of first-person shooting galleries, an aspect from the original Robocop game, and a puzzle game in which the player must help Robocop remember his memories by arranging certain electronic chips. An arcade version manufactured by Data East was also released in 1991. So, let's start by looking at the arcade version before we dive into the console and computer versions. Here's the arcade version. And here, Robocop has to track down the evil Kane, a drug dealer whose brain is being implanted into a massive robot. The arcade game is a combination of belt-scrolling beat-em-up and a run-and-gun. Robocop is always equipped with a pistol with two separate buttons for shooting right and shooting left. He can also punch and body slam enemies if he gets close enough, and there are a handful of other weapons too, like bazookas. I like bazookas. The stages are broken up with a few sections where Robocop turns towards the background and fires at approaching bad guys. These segments are reminiscent of gallery shooters like Cabal. There are also a few bonus stages which take place in a first-person perspective as you ride a police cruiser down the highway and target enemies. Now, most of the game is spent shooting random street punks, though one level does take place in a drug manufacturing plant where the vile substance effectively turns the bad guys into zombies. There's also another face-off with Ed 209 near the end of the game. Nearly the entire final level is spent in an epic battle with Kane as you chase him through a building onto the roof, pile drive him down back onto the ground and then finally destroy him on the city streets. It's a great set piece, but it's also the most tedious part of the game. Boss battles like this can be frustrating since you need to jump and hit a weak point to damage them, which makes you an easy target. And it also takes forever since you need to beat him 4 times. Otherwise, it's a pretty middle of the road arcade game, fun but shallow. Right, okay, let's get on to the subsequent console and computer versions released by Ocean Software. And the first one up is the Amiga version, and the Amiga version was developed by Special FX and published by Ocean Software. In the United Kingdom, Ocean released the Amiga version in November 1990. And the programming of the Amiga version began months before the film's release. As a guide, the Special FX development team was given a pre-release version of the film that excluded several scenes. The team was also given a preliminary script to the film and pictures of the characters. Audio samples from the film, including Robocop's gunfire and footsteps, were added into the Amiga version. This is a fun game that has great music and animation. Similar to the first Robocop game, this has 3 different types of gameplay over 7 levels. There's your run and gun shoot 'em up platform sections, there's puzzle games, and there's a shooting gallery section in which you have to rescue the hostages. In addition to killing the bad guys, you have to also rescue the hostages and collect the cans of Nuke. You have to collect 10 canisters before you can move on to the next section, and if you rescue 10 hostages, then you'll be rewarded with a free life. And I think you do need these free lives to actually complete this game. The game is fun to play, although I have to say the controls are a little bit fiddly. And also, Robocop has this floaty jump, which doesn't really go down well considering that he should weigh the same as a small elephant. Now, the Amiga version did receive praise for its graphics and sound, but some reviewers criticised its lack of originality. Ray's called it challenging and extremely well presented, and noted the especially addictive puzzle sections. The One considered the game to be an improvement over its predecessor, particularly for its platform-based gameplay. However, The One noted that the game omitted several notable sequences from the film. CU Amiga praised the addictive gameplay and called Robocop 2 the best licensed product of 1990. And Amiga Format, they criticised the game for having difficult controls, but did praise the gameplay, calling it enjoyable. Amiga Power also criticised the controls, while Amiga Computing criticised the game's difficulty, but all in all, it's not a bad game. Right, now we're on to the Amstrad GX4000 Robocop version. The GX4000, in case you didn't know what it is a video game console that was manufactured by Amstrad. It was the company's short-lived attempt to enter the games console market. The console was released in Europe in 1990 and was an upgraded design based on the then still popular CPC technology. The GX4000 was Amstrad's first and only attempt at entering the console market. Although offering enhanced graphics capabilities, it failed to gain popularity in the market and was quickly discontinued, selling only 15,000 units in total. In all, there was only 30 games produced and distributed for the GX4000. And one of those games, and one of the most notable games that is, was Robocop 2. Now, Robocop 2 for the GX4000, it follows the same template as the other versions of the game released by Ocean Software, in that it combines platforming action, a puzzle mode and a shooting gallery, but with different level designs and gameplay mechanics. In the 3 platform levels, Robocop must find the goal point of the level before time and energy run out. The levels are full of hazards like electricity, rolling boulders, falling spikes, stomping machinery and more. Compared to the other versions of the game, the enemies are relatively rare and no gun power-ups are available. Though Robo can collect extra lives, energy and short time invincibility power-ups though. And optionally, he can collect nuke drug canisters and arrest suspects, both of which give bonus points at the end of the level. Suspects should not be shot, however, because doing so drains the energy substantially. Every level contains several one-screen bonus rooms. Entering these presents Robocop with both more hazards but also more items to collect. Entering the room also activates a reset point, so the level doesn't have to be started over again when a life is lost. I like that, I have to say. And the last level, well, it concludes with a boss battle against Kane, also known as Robocop 2. And after every platform level, a puzzle level follows. To regain Robo's lost memories, a cursor must be moved over a circuit board with the goal of hitting all black chips while avoiding all red ones. Moving the cursor leaves a trail of burnt circuitry, which must not be crossed again. It is possible to rearrange the board by shifting the current row left or right, or the current column up or down. And 4 boards must be completed successively within 3 minutes to gain the maximum number of points. In the shooting gallery, targets appear in windows and on the street, and a crosshair must be moved to hit them. Both criminals and innocents are among the targets. Naturally, the civilians should be spared to achieve the best possible score, so be careful. Now, Robocop turned out to be quite a good game on this system. Visually, the game is taken up by a third of the display bar. It is off-putting at first, but you do get used to it. I guess this was done to allow for the smooth and fast gameplay. And for me, that certainly worked. Visually, there is also plenty of colour in this version. It does look good. Perhaps what I would say about this game is that it is a challenging game. In fact, it's pretty tough. Overall, Robocop and the Amstrad GX4000 turned out to be a good game. It's a real shame, it's a pity the system failed, as the game certainly demonstrated what the console was very much capable of. I suppose at the end of the day, Amstrad simply lacked the marketing power to compete with the mighty Sega Mega Drive, and then eventually the Super Nintendo system. So, Alan Sugar, you're fired. The sequel to the biggest selling Specky game of all time had to be good, didn't it? I mean, Ocean wouldn't have lived down a dud. And here it is, and I have to say, it's fab. The first striking thing are the graphics, all really well designed and detailed. Animation's great too, there's always lots happening on screen, and Robocop stomps about like he means business, of which of course he does. And the second striking thing is how tough the game is. Gameplay's much more than just a combat blasting affair. There's a lot of brain work involved here too. There are 7 levels in this game, and the action begins at the River Rogue Drugs Laboratory, which basically looks like a fallen down warehouse. The detailed backdrops do a smooth 8-way scroll. As Robo moves around, he can stomp left, right, jump up and crouch. There's no time allowed for practice. I mean, opponents rush in immediately, so grab your gun and blast. And you can fire left, right, up and at different angles with a variety of collectible weapons. And the guards, well, they're armed with everything from handguns to missile launchers, and being hit knocks down Robo's energy level. If it sinks to 0, you can wave cheerio to alive, so you need to be careful. Funnily enough, dying outright can be put off for a long time. You're awarded continue plays for doing practically well in a level and fallen icons. If shot, boost power reserves and time limit. But try and avoid collecting the minus icons as they deplete your power. Now, running away from the bad guys isn't any use as crates halt Robo's progress and have to be punched to pieces. Mapping is essential as the game insists on you knowing a good route, which includes leaping on moving conveyor belts, jumping onto platforms and all sorts of tricky manoeuvres, not just running around blasting. To help Robo around, there are lifts, doors and, if you can, find them insecure walls to be smashed, giving you entrance into another part of the warehouse. So, that's about it for level 1. Now, level 2 is completely different. It's a puzzle game. You're looking at a load of chips in a memory bank, and the task is to move a cursor around collecting the white chips in 4 banks to help Robo remember his human identity. We saw this in the previous game. Sounds easy enough. I suppose the problem is that as you move the cursor, the area behind it fades away, and you can't go over the empty space. Also, red chips are lethal, so you gotta avoid those. Right, and now another style of gameplay for level 3 is back to that shooting gallery, where Robo has 1 minute to shoot enemy targets. And again, you control the crosshairs with the help of a targeting device to let you know when to fire. Level 4 is like level 1, a warehouse brewery where Robo stomps around shooting opponents and negotiating platforms. The playing area isn't very wide, but it is very, very tall. And be careful not to fall as there are a few lethal beer vats around. You can get over the tanks by grabbing hold of a moving hook, but be quick or Robo's weight will send him to a happy death. Another danger is droplets of beer which make Robo drunk, reversing his controls. It's a bit hellish to complete level 4 as there are lots of hidden doors and you're playing against the clock. Levels 5 and 6 are more tricky repeats of 2 and 3, get 50% success rating in level 6 shooting gallery and an extra life is awarded. Level 7 is another stomp around and shoot 'em level, set in the posh office of the Civic Centrum. Billions of human enemies and security droids built along the floors. There are many Ed 209s and little robots that can be kicked out of the way. The playing area is massive and interconnected with security locked doors. And to unlock them, you have to solve a numeric password puzzle. You know, like complete the sequence 2, 4, 6, and obviously the last one's 8. Easy. The game is completed after finding the back door to the Civic Centrum, and this is quite difficult, and then defeating the huge mean Robocop Mark II. This really was difficult, I have to say. And then that's it. Phew, what a game. The programmers have packed so much into the varied styles of gameplay, and it's one of the few games actually worth the asking price. Yes, sure, it's tricky to play at first, but you'll soon get the hang of it. The presentation is absolutely superb, and there are objective and status reports after each level, and a few digitised scenes from the movie, all with great music. I suppose for me the only aggravating bit is when you die you return to the start of the level, or at least the last door you walked through. But apart from that, Robocop 2 is fast, furious, addictive, and a hell of a lot of fun to play. Right, so now we're on to the Atari ST version of Robocop 2. Now, I first played Robocop 2 on a demo disc from the Amiga Format magazine at a friend's house, and it looked and sounded amazing. I mean, the sprites were huge and the nuke animations when you shot someone looked fantastic at the time, so I thought I would give the Atari ST version a go. However, playing the Atari ST version, well, I was surprised. I mean, it's not even the same game. I mean, it had more common elements of both the ZX Spectrum and the GX 4000 version, but with all new levels. I suppose I was very disappointed with its originality. It just didn't look like an arcade game, which the Amiga pulled off perfectly. And then there's that large status bar at the bottom of the screen that we also saw in the Amiga version. There are large detail sprites, but not quite as big as the Amiga. I like the animation in this level though, pretty good. The music, well, it's okay, but not as good as the Amiga version, and the sounds are certainly subpar too. And coming back to both of them though, I really love the smooth animation of the small ST character sprite, and I think it actually plays better. Actually, going back to the Amiga version is actually quite painful after playing this ST version. So, I would say that the Amiga version has the looks, but the ST version, it certainly has more personality. Right, let's have a look at Robocop 2 on the NES. The graphics for the NES game is mediocre. I think they have utilised the NES's capability in this game. You can see the pixels in the game, like more NES games out there. Your Robocop guy looks okay, you can tell he's made out of metal and that he has a gun in his leg. I suppose this means that the programmers did a good job at simulating the effect of metal on the game. The environment setting in this game is in the streets, inside a factory, at an alley and some other places. The ambiences are okay, nothing really cool or mundane either. I suppose I liked the music because it did provide Robocop's theme song. There are some tracks in the game which switches at certain situations, such as different music during the boss encounter, and another soundtrack when you're scrolling around fighting the endless baddies. There are also the sound effects of guns, you know, that little piff sound when you fire your pistol. Then there are a little beeping sound when you kill the bad guys, and the explosions when you shoot something up too. Now, Nintendo Power reviewed the NES version, noted that the character of Robocop can be initially difficult to control. I suppose for me, this is just an average NES game. It's okay, but nothing special. Right, now we're on to the Commodore 64. Christ, I hope it's better than that first buggy Robocop. Now this game didn't come out in a tape, it actually came out in a cartridge format for the C64GS. And the C64GS is the cartridge-based home video game console version of the popular Commodore 64 home computer. It was released in December 1990 by Commodore into what was already a booming console market dominated by Nintendo and Sega. So, no guesses how well that system done then, huh? Yep, that's right, shite. Anyway, this version is basically a straight conversion of the NES version. However, it only contains 13 out of the 15 levels found on the NES version. All in all, the game looks and plays and looks pretty good. Perhaps there's a gaudy look to the graphics, but there is plenty of background animation in the game, and the music is also good and captures the overall feel of what a Robocop game should be. Although, they didn't actually use the actual theme. Muppets. Another observation is that there's that floaty Robocop thing. Not too sure why they've done that, it's kinda stupid. And in the game, you still have to collect 60% of the nukes and rescue 60% of the hostages to advance to the next stage. Perhaps a little bit frustrating trying to do this because you could not backtrack in this game. So this version of the game is really based on an average NES game. However, at least it's all bug-free. Right, now we're on to the Game Boy. Okay, good, decent graphics. For obvious reasons, it does not look as good as the arcade version or even the NES version due to the hardware limitations. But the sprites are nice and detailed for Robocop with good animation. The characters are fairly good, all well animated, but some look a bit samey. Look out for the bikers on the later levels as they are some of the most detailed. The backgrounds are a bit flat and quite boring, not to mention repetitive. There's also been some effort put into the music. Unlike many Game Boy games, the music is actually worth hearing, mainly for the reinterpretation of the Robocop film theme tune. The sound effects are fairly decent too, but it is let down by the limited sound card. Some of the explosions sound quite muddy, but are still okay. The shooting noises, especially the three-way gun, are enjoyable though. Like a lot of side-scrolling shooters, it is quite repetitive. Just like the other games I suppose, walk and shoot the enemies, kill the boss at the end and not much else to it. But there are some enemies which take you by surprise, especially the machine gun toting maniacs who shoot out of windows. And once you pick up when you expect a bad guy to shoot out of a window or creep up behind you, it becomes easier. There are power-ups along the way, such as a gun with more powerful bullets and the three-way shooter. And as I've already mentioned, it is a bit repetitive, but it is challenging too. I suppose I would rate the game as a medium-hard difficulty. I think many gamers would find it difficult to complete though. And like many of the games of its type, a continue makes you start from the beginning of a level. But in saying all that, if the repetitiveness or difficulty can be overcome, then there's an enjoyable game to be found here. Game Boy Robocop 2 is a decent side-scrolling shooting game. The Game Boy's limited hardware is put to good use. Yes, the game is repetitive, but it is also enjoyable. There are certainly worse side-scrolling shooters such as Navy SEALs, and unless you want to go down the flying shooter route with Paradis or I-Type, or a samurai game such as Ninja Gaiden, then this is one of the better ones. So, give it a go. Yep, that baby food eating dude's back for a third movie. Robocop 3 was released in 1993 and was directed by Fred Decker and written by Decker and Frank Miller. It is the final entry in the original Robocop franchise. Now, Paul Weller, the clever geezer, he decided not to star in this third film about Delta City, so they had to get a new bloke in called Rover Burke. The film also starred Nancy Allen and Rip Tom. So this donkey of a film, it's set in the near future in a dystopian metropolitan Detroit. The plot centres on Robocop as he vows to avenge the death of his partner Ann Lewis and save Detroit from falling into chaos while evil conglomerate OCP, run by its CEO, advances its program to demolish the city and build a new Delta City over the former homes of their residents. Sounds good, doesn't it? Well, it's not. It's absolute pish. In fact, the film was a critical and commercial failure in the US, grossing only $47 million worldwide against its $22 million budget, making it the least profitable film of the Robocop franchise. Such a shite film. But anyway, we're not here to discuss this shite film, we're here to discuss the games of Robocop 3. So, the Amiga, the Atari ST and the DOS versions were developed by Digital Image Design beginning in September 1990, and it was published by Ocean Software in December 1991. And the Digital Image Design versions include multiple gameplay styles, and we'll get into that in a second.
Close combat with ninja robots, jetpack flying missions and much more, all in a staggering three-dimensional environment.
Brought to you by our sponsors, Ocean Software.
And during 1992 and 1993, other versions consisting of side-scrolling platform gameplay were released for the Commodore 64, the ZX Spectrum, the NES, the Super NES, the Game Gear, the Master System and the Sega Genesis. The Genesis version had been released in the US by 1994 and was published by Flying Edge, a division of Acclaim Software. And it's also worth noting that the SNES version was also released as an arcade game through the Nintendo Super System.
At a crime with Robocop 3 from Flying Edge.
So, I think we'll start with the Amiga and the Atari ST and the DOS games first. Now, the Amiga, the Atari ST and the DOS game was developed by Digital Image Design, which began work on the game in September 1990. Orion Pictures initially kept most of the film's story details secretive, so the Digital Image Design development team had to proceed using guesswork, which ultimately resulted in some mistakes. In one instance recalled by Martin Kenwright of Digital Image Design, somebody mentioned that Robocop was going to ride a gyrocycle. We took that to mean some powerful motorcycle, so we spent ages thinking about Robocop racing about on a bike, only to find out later it was a jetpack. Weeks of work were just wasted. I mean, the team had only film stills as visual reference during development, and many of the game's ideas originated as sketches and storyboards hand-drawn by artist Sean Hollywood. The game was also developed using a significantly modified version of the 3D game engine previously used by Digital Image Design to develop F-29 Retaliator. The Digital Image Design version was published by Ocean Software in December 1991 before the eventual release of the film in 1993. Anyway, let's have a look at the Amiga version first, and then we'll look at the Atari ST and then the DOS. The Digital Image Design version consists of 5 different game segments that include driving, shooting enemies to rescue hostages, hand-to-hand combat, flying a jetpack and battling a robot ninja. And this version includes the arcade action option, which allows the player to play any of the game's 5 sequences as a single mission with its own plot and mission objectives. The player can also play the game sequences as part of an overall adventure story known as Movie Adventure, with more characters and different enemies. For much of the Movie Adventure mode, the player is allowed to play any mission rather than following a specific arrangement. During this mode, the player can also choose to abort missions, which affects enemies' decisions as well as the plot. And then between the levels, a news broadcast is played to inform the player of the story and advance the game. The opening driving sequence offers a smooth frame rate and convincing 3D visuals. While the stage doesn't do a great job of signposting you towards your destination, there is at least a map to stop you wandering around in circles. However, the toughest and most infuriating part of the game is the controls. While they're twitchy and overly sensitive in the driving sections, it is possible to adjust by taking things slowly. However, in contrast, the first-person shooting levels are an absolute nightmare, as it's impossible to strafe, meaning you'll have to slowly turn 90 degrees to see if any bad guys are around the corner, all the while being shot and losing precious life. It is slightly puzzling why it wasn't included, and if it wasn't doable, then perhaps the whole gameplay element would have benefited from being an on-rail shooter. And what also induces rage is that the enemies are seemingly capable of shooting through walls, and despite their location being completely out of your field of view, you'll still take damage until you rush forward with reckless abandon and no regard for stealth tactics. I do think that's a shame, as these levels look absolutely stunning with their 3D polygons and gritty art style. And I have to say that the frame rate is also solid, with the music providing an ample tension that fits the series to a T. And the sound effects are also top notch, and the sound of your machine gun blasting away is extremely satisfying. And tying everything together are lots of cutscenes and news reports, but they do seem to outstay their welcome and tend to drag on just a little bit too long in my opinion. So, in summary, Robocop screams of wasted potential as it does so many things right, from its outstanding graphics, captivating world and gameplay variety, yet it shoots itself in the foot by including some seriously wonky controls. I mean, a basic strafe ability would have done wonders, but I have to say without it, you're bound to an experience filled with cheap hits. Right, let's have a look at the Atari ST version, shall we? Very similar to the Amiga, but with less music and inferior sound effects, but apart from that, it's the same game. Let's have a look. Right, here we go. Here's the DOS version of Robocop 3. And I have to say, for me, this is the better version of the 3. It's got much improved visuals, the game music and the sound effects are very good, and the movement is also smoother. It's a better version all around. Let's have a look. Okay, here's the ZX Spectrum version of the game. And this version, well, it's a side-scrolling platform game that includes a horizontally scrolling shoot-'em-up section. Now, the Speccy version features only monochrome graphics across 5 levels. And in each of these 5 levels that make up the game, you, as Robocop, must put a stop to the evil OCP Corporation and the drug-crazed splatterpunks by shooting everything you see. The cityscape is a monochrome waste. You can shoot either to the left or the right, and your aim is to completely clear the street of the baddies. There's a little arrow at the bottom of the screen which tells you what direction the next nasty's coming from. This level's incredibly derivative, and it suffers from the same problem as most games of this type. Basically, it can be a bit annoying when your crosshair melts into the background and you end up firing randomly. As well as knocking out as many splatterpunks as possible, you've also got to shoot lots of little credit squares that come bouncing along at various intervals. You see, at the end of each level you get a screen showing which bits of Robocop have actually been shot away. And as long as you've collected enough credits, you can repair them and get ready to battle out the next level. So there you go. Right, so here's the second level. And in level 2 you become Robocop rather than a gun sight. And again you also come in contact with that rather nasty ninja who goes by the name of Otomo. He's a pretty powerful adversary, I have to say. And this little bugger, well, he stalks a car factory and you've got to jump along loads of platforms and blast him to bits. He takes flipping ages to kill and you've got to watch out for all those splatterpunks and rehabs that are running around also, and keep an eye open for that quicksand too. One false step and you'll be swallowing mud. It's certainly a bit on the tough side this level, but you can grab some power-ups to help make life a tad easier, I suppose. A little disc with an A+ sign in the middle might not look very useful, but shoot at it and you'll get a lovely new weapon. However, these initial power-ups have a set number of shots and they don't actually last very long. I suppose the trick here is to get a hold of an infinite amount of supply of bullets. And there's a little P floating about that will guarantee this, but it's not exactly easy to track them down. And just like the first level, there are loads of little credit squares knocking around. Shoot them all and you'll be able to give Robocop a good going over later on. Right, now once you've waved goodbye to Otomo, it's time to hit the streets of Motwan. I have to say, the buildings all look like Art Deco cinemas just after the Second World War. And through this desolate wasteland flies Robocop, swooping up and down platforms with his jetpack tied on tightly. And to make it a bit tougher, the rehabs and splatterpunks have also got their own jetpacks, and at the end of the level there's a baddie, a massive blimmin' tank. Find it, then you have to trash it. And once you get rid of that flipping tank, it's time to enter the OCP offices. And blocking the entrance is an Ed 209. He's a real toughie, but if you've got this far then you'll probably be able to finish him off. Once in the building, there's oodles of lifts to travel about in and loads of realistic radiators to slip past. And then at the top of the tower you'll find another couple of these blooming Otomos. Flippin' egg, fighting one of them was hard enough, but to fight two of them, bloomin' egg. Right, so Robocop, what do I think of Robocop? Well, it's a difficult game and it's not one you're going to finish in a couple of sit-ins. And the reason these ninja chaps are so bloomin' hard to beat is because they're actually robotic ninjas. But there again, Robocop's not exactly human either, so it's not that unfair, is it? Robocop 3 plays well, and despite the lack of colour, it does actually look good. Robocop 3 has some very nice graphics, especially the first level. The animation also is of a high standard, and the backgrounds are atmospheric and detailed. And the sound isn't too bad either, with plenty of blasting and squelching sounds to accompany the action. The streets of Detroit seem suitably dilapidated and there's tons of rehabs and splatterpunks to shoot your way through. With piles of platforms and windows full of nasties, the whole thing looks like a mapper's dream. If you enjoyed the other two then I can't see any reason why you wouldn't enjoy this one. It was jolly good fun, I enjoyed it. Right, now we're on to the Commodore 64 version, which was published by Ocean in 1992 and developed by Probe Software. Probe's Robocop 3 combines two different styles of gameplay that we saw in the ZX Spectrum version. The first level is an Operation Wolf style shooting gallery, while the rest are side-scrolling platform levels. Robocop's enemies are mostly splatterpunks and rehabs, with bosses Otomo ninja bots, a tank and Robocop's old friend Ed 209. And as we saw in the platform levels, Robo can collect weapon power-ups, which upgrade his standard weapon first to rapid fire and then to a 3-way shot. Also available are a flamethrower, laser gun and a guided missile, each with only limited ammunition. And again, in level 3, Robocop dons his jetpack to fly across the area, but must walk back to the same way in level 4. And also, in all levels, he can collect repair tokens, which allow the player to repair specific areas of the cyborg's body in a repair screen between levels. However, where this game differs from the ZX Spectrum is with the new improved and colourful graphics. There's certainly no monochrome colours here. Yep, this version is certainly of a higher quality. There's an awful lot going on and it's all got good graphics and plenty of gameplay. Okay, perhaps not earth-shattering, but it's certainly great to settle down for a few hours. Another similarity, just like the Specky version, Robocop won't be easy to finish. I mean, I have to say, I'll be surprised if the whole game can actually be completed in a few days. Right, so Robocop finally graces the Master System with the help of those lovely people at Acclaim. Robo 3 is a side-scrolling platform game featuring level after level of fast-paced action. You can walk, jump and shoot your way through this high-powered cart, but your objective remains the same: stop OSP before they can complete their evil plans. Unlike the original arcade game, you can't punch your assailants, but a wide array of weaponry makes up for this. You start with a standard shot, but you can pick up a 3-way cannon, a laser and a flamethrower. I like that flamethrower. And again, each of these weapons has a limited supply of ammo, so you need to use them wisely. Numerous bad guys, some mechanical, other humans, do their best to stop you. Annihilate them and use special weapons to blast the end of level Guardian before moving on to the next section. And again, later levels see Robocop taken to the skies with the aid of his new jetpack and tackling flying OCP troops, ninja robots and floating mines. Now, there's only one skill level, but the options screen lets you set between 3 and 5 lives, and 1 or 2 continues. I suppose I was a little bit disappointed when I played this game. I mean, I don't have any gripes with the graphics because they're actually very good for the Master System. I mean, Robo's well animated, but he moves a bit too stiffly, even for a cyborg. The bad guys are impressive, and there are enough of them to keep even the toughest cop occupied. And those backdrops are detailed, but can get a little bit repetitive, I suppose. For me, the main trouble lies in the gameplay. It's all a bit samey. Robocop 3 has nothing I haven't already seen in 1,000 other shoot-'em-ups, and the cyborg himself has only a few moves. I haven't really got a whole lot to say about Robocop 3 on the Game Gear. It's a rather shallow game, fair enough on the Game Gear if it was fun, but it's not. The graphics are okay, if a little drab, and the thumping tunes are some of the better examples of Game Gear music, but the game's too boring and frustrating. Your large sprite is an unmissable target for most enemy fire, however fast your own trigger is. And coupled with the unimaginative level formats, it's a quick turn off. We often whinge that games are too easy, but there's a fine line between pleasantly challenging, i.e. hard, and ridiculously frustrating, i.e. ridiculously frustrating. This falls into the latter category, and boredom soon sets in, along with the foul temper. And Mean Machine Sega, well, they criticise the Game Gear version also for its difficulty, and also the drab backgrounds, but they did praise the music. Right, now we're on to the NES version of Robocop 3. And just like the other games, Robo walks from left to right through a bunch of familiar locales, including city streets, a factory and OCP tower. The good news is that our hero does more than just slowly wander around, he also dons a jetpack and takes out enemies from the sky. There are 5 stages in total, though only 4 feel fleshed out to be called real stages. And the final boss is a bit of a joke, requiring players to dodge enemies we know Robo has no problem killing in order to hack a computer. There's no big robots to take down, just 2 regular sized ninjas we've already fought in the other stages of the games. I know it's the NES, but the graphics are a bit bad, but I suppose that goes without saying. I mean, Robo looks like he stepped out of a Saturday morning cartoon, a far cry from the hero whose first movie was notoriously slapped with an X rating for violence. The NES Robo is a rather kinder, gentler Robo, one who isn't fazed by ninja attacks and repeating backgrounds. Even the most die-hard fan of Robocop will admit that the third movie was a kind of a mess. But even with the horrible acting and cheesy storyline, there are still a few ideas that could translate to a video game. I mean, how cool would it have been to take control of the Ed 209 and flip the tables on an army of robot ninjas? And what about that epic battle where the police go head to head with a brigade of OCP brainwashed thugs? And just imagine how different this would have been if Robo actually got help from the Resistance, a key plot point in the movie of the same name. These ideas may have not turned Robocop 3 into the must-have game of 1992, but at least it would have shown they were trying. So I suppose it's a generic action game with poor graphics and only 5 short stages. Now, the Sega Genesis version is a shoot-'em-up platform game which is based on the SNES version. However, this Genesis version features 6 levels, while the side-scrolling NES version only featured 5. In the Genesis version, the player has a flamethrower as an additional weapon that is absent from the NES and the SNES versions. So, players must lug Robocop's notoriously bulky ass across 6 levels, filled with street punks and robotic enemies, all looking to turn him into scrap metal. Unlike all best Mega Drive games, Robocop 3 allows you to set your life count between 1 and 3 and the amount of continues you have between none and 2, and the game's difficulty from easy, medium or hard, but there's also no option to disable the in-game timer. By default, A allows you to switch between Robocop's different weapons acquired from item drops during the gameplay, and B fires his current weapon and C allows him to jump. However, I have to say these controls didn't really work for me, so I took advantage of the customization options to change them to something that actually makes sense. That was A to fire, B to jump and C to change weapons. I should also note that you can hold the fire button to continuously shoot, but this will burn through your ammo pretty quickly. And when you run out completely, you're left relying on Robocop's weak ass punches until you grab some ammo. You can also shoot upwards, diagonally and while crouching and jumping. Although the options also include a music and sound effects test, I was a little bit disappointed that the iconic Robocop theme was missing, and in its place are a series of generic cyberpunk style rock tunes. They're okay, but come on, where's the theme tune? Although we're treated to a big detailed graphic of Robocop and the Robocop 3 logo, there's no story graphics and even text here. We're simply dropped right onto the streets of Detroit, which actually makes a pretty good first impression. You can see the city in the background, Robocop's police cruiser, dilapidated buildings with eviction notice slapped on them, flickering lampposts and even signs advertising the impending arrival of Delta City. Robocop also looks pretty good, far better than the generic and uninspiring enemies he faces, though he has no idle poses and remains an unwieldy and bulky character. You'll need to make use of the various crates piled about too, to take cover and avoid incoming fire, but enemies can simply walk and shoot right through them, and it's almost impossible to avoid taking a bullet or a rocket to the face, as Robocop is so chunky, meaning you're liable to see him downed in a dramatic explosion if you're not careful. Robocop can pick up a couple of additional ammo types as he goes, including a helpful 3-way shot and a powerful laser. And I like that laser because it altered his sprite to include his new gun arm attachment from the movie. And you can also replenish his health using rare pickups. Now, you'll have to be very careful of the stage hazards. Fallen wrecking balls and bottomless pits are abound, and Robocop's platforming skills have a lot to be desired. There's only one checkpoint in this stage, meaning you really have to be on the ball, hop into small moving platforms and taking out the bullet sponge tanks and drones that patrol the streets and skies above. Now, we've all witnessed that Robocop 3 can be a very difficult game, and this is one of those titles where the only cheat available is a level skip. I certainly struggled to even get past the first stage. With a great deal of patience and abuse of save states, I reached the first boss with full health and armed with Robocop's 3-way shot and laser. But I absolutely stood little chance against the wave upon a wave of rocket launcher totem baddies, since they attack from both sides and Robocop's crouch is next to useless for avoiding incoming fire. It's a bit of a shame, really, because the game looks pretty decent. There's a lovely detailed graphic of Robocop on fire and the enforcement droid 209 when you die, that even includes a voice sample, and there's some visual promise to the game. Now, playthroughs of the game show that it can be easily beaten in less than 15 minutes if you're able to stick with it. But, God, you gotta stick with it. Looking ahead, there's more voice samples, all of them from the first movie, and Robocop fights up and across rooftops, battles waves of rehab mercenaries alongside a reprogrammed Ed 209, acquires a flame burst and even encounters a gigantic robotic Satan in a parking garage. Other movie locations include the church, where Robocop must find keys to open doors and fight the agile robot Ninja Otomo in the sewers, and the Omni Consumer Productions Tower, where players must defeat 2 Otomos to finish a game and finally earn some story text. And again, the gameplay is broken up by some fun-looking bullet hell overhead shooter sections, where Robocop flies above the city streets in his jetpack, blasting at demonic-looking robots and drones. But I honestly can't be bothered to fire up this dreck of a game to try and play them. So in case you're not feeling it, I did grow very frustrated with the game very quickly. And as I said, even when I reached the first enemy swarm that masqueraded as a boss battle, I couldn't beat it, even with full health, though I'd wager that I might be able to get further now that I know what to expect of the game. However, I have to say I have no desire to, as there are far better similar games on the Mega Drive and the Genesis. The Robocop arcade games are much better use of your time, and there's no way that you'd even pick this game over Robocop vs the Terminator, which we're going to look at very soon. Produced in 1992 by developer Ocean for the SNES, the game delivers the Robocop experience at the finest standards. After 3 Robocop games for the NES, it's time for the SNES to unleash its power. This is a game that I still play with joy to this day. Okay, it still provides that challenge after countless playthroughs, but it's good. It's a pretty good game. I'm not too sure why, but for some reason I did prefer this game over the Genesis version. Also, even without the element of the story, there is quite a challenge to be found here. Just like the Mega Drive and Genesis version of this game, it is hard, but I suppose you can get good at this game and kick some serious nuke butt if you practice enough. The graphics are very good, very realistic. The Robocop character shines, and unlike many other Robocop games where the Robocop character looks a bit wimpy, here the character is very believable. From the realistic looks of Robocop to the thud sound he makes while walking, a lot of effort has been put into the Robocop character. You really feel like a walking tank gunning down one enemy after another, since normal bullets do next to no damage. The settings are also very atmospheric, from the dark streets of Detroit to an abandoned church. Every level has its own feel. Unlike the Genesis, this game is about choosing your best weapons for every occasion. You have to think carefully of which weapon to choose though, otherwise you will die. And you will die fast. For example, rockets work extremely well against the red flying enemies in level 2, but for groups of human enemies, the flamethrower works better. And practice certainly makes perfect in this game. And in this respect, the game is an early example of a tactical shooter. The underground garage is a prime example of this. Without very careful consideration, you die in an instant. So, flamethrowers are key to survival, and the rocket launcher is very useful later in the level. And you can save costly ammunition by punching the bad guys, which is very funny. At one point you get to help Ed 209, which is very cool, as one of the first examples of buddy co-op in a video game. It also saves you a lot of ammo, but you have to be quick to decide if you shoot yourself or let Ed help you. Ed seems a bit rusty and not so fast at times, but this is where you come in. But don't be too late, as the punishment is a rocket in your titanium harness. And here we are, back onto these flying levels. And just like the previous games, here you have Robocop flying around, shooting like crazy at strange flying orbs. But these levels require 200% of your attention, speed and stamina. Even an inexperienced player that knows this game in and out will struggle at the second flying level. The difficulty goes beyond insane. And that church level, well, that certainly separates the men from the boys. You start the level, and before you advance 100 metres, you've already gunned down hordes of bazooka shooters. And I have to say, you're doing pretty well if you retain 30% of your power. After that, a welcome energy cell awaits. But be careful, don't accidentally shoot it. After that, you rendezvous with rats, which drain your power fast, and there's only one weapon that can kill them, so you need to choose the right one. In summary, the game is short, but adrenaline-filled, with incredible difficulty, but it is beatable. If you're looking for a challenge, look no further. It will take you many attempts to see the end of this game, but it's worth a try. After notching one film apiece, the Terminator and Robocop stood equal. Both had been incredible sleeper hits, totally unfancied at the box office, and demonstrated the pointedly adult sci-fi talents of maverick directors looking for their first major breakthrough hit. Then, when the inventable sequels appeared, the two franchises began to diverge. 1991's Terminator 2 Judgment Day eclipsed even its predecessor and broke box office records worldwide, while Robocop 2, released a year earlier, was very far from the success that the first film had been, both critically and commercially. Bafflingly, a further Terminator film then appeared elusive, while Robocop received a third, even more poorly received, out in 1993, that made the heinous mistake of going ahead without its original star, Peter Weller. Nevertheless, thanks mainly to the UK's Ocean Software, there was already a rich vein of Robocop starring video games at this point. However, the pixelated Terminator was lagging behind. It was time for a dramatic merging of these two violent worlds. Robocop vs. the Terminator began as a 4-part comic book series, also titled Robocop vs. the Terminator in 1992, which is a crossover between the Robocop and Terminator franchises. Now, Virgin Games secured the license for a video game based on the comic, but were unfortunately unable to use the comic's plot elements. The lead designer and coder on the game was John Botti, and the team began developing it in-house at the same time as they were developing Disney's Aladdin. I liked that game, particularly on the Genesis. I liked Aladdin. And this license for the title, it cost $2 million. The game, it was released for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, the Master System and Game Gear in 1993, with later ports to the Sega Genesis and Game Boy in 1994. They're all side-scrolling action platformers, but they were all developed by different studios. The SNES version was made by Interplay, the Game Gear and Master System was by NMS Software, and the Game Boy was made by Unexpected Development. And then finally the Genesis version was developed by Virgin Games, and which uses an engine written by David Perry himself. And the Genesis version, well, it was awarded the bloodiest game of 1993 by Electronic Gaming Monthly. Nice. And there was also a platform game tie-in for the Nintendo Entertainment System, but this was ultimately cancelled. And apparently the ROM for it has since been distributed online. Now, I would normally start off with the SNES version because that was the first game released. However, I'm going to start off with the Sega Genesis because this is where all the development for this game originally started. So, the Sega Genesis version of Robocop vs. the Terminator was developed by Virgin Games USA and came out second despite being the first game to enter the development. And as I already mentioned, the lead developer and coder of the game was John Botti, and the team began developing in-house at the same time as they were developing the Disney game Aladdin. Now, Tim Williams also worked alongside John Botti, and he stated, "At the time, I seem to remember there were more high-profile games at Virgin, like Aladdin, so there was a feeling that Robocop vs the Terminator was the ugly stepchild when I joined the team, but I was absolutely thrilled to get my own game to design for." Now, both Williams and Botti began staying up at night playing Contra 3 The Alien Wars. Certainly one of their favourite games, and they wanted to find out what made its gameplay addictive. And the two concluded that the vectored bullets was key, and they decided to include it as a core mechanic in Robocop vs the Terminator. I like that Contra 3 game, very good. And to save time during development, the game uses Dave Perry's Mega Drive engine, which was recently used in games such as Cool Spot and Global Gladiators. Now, Botti does mention that he had his own tools from previous projects, but he states that David Perry's engine was clean and it's been used on other Genesis games. Although he did make enhancements to the engine to make it more suitable for the Robocop vs Terminator game. So let's have a look at the Mega Drive, or the Genesis as you like to call it in the USA. Let's have a look at that version. First of all, what's the plot? Well, the game is set a few years after Robocop's invention, and the story involves Sak Norad contacting Cyberdyne Systems on building Skynet. And Cyberdyne used Robocop's technology in creating Skynet. When activated, Skynet becomes self-aware and launches a war against mankind. In the future, Skynet sends several Terminators back to the past to cripple the Resistance. After destroying one of the Terminators, Robocop proceeds to Delta City, where he confronts Robocane. After Robocane was destroyed, Robocop battles his way to the OCP building, where he defeats all the Terminators. And after defeating an Ed 209 unit, which was reprogrammed by the Terminators, Robocop plugs himself into a console. And unbeknownst to him, Robocop gave Skynet information it can use. This ends up with Robocop falling into a trap. And in the future, Robocop assembles himself, where he battled in the Terminator-infested future and destroyed Skynet. So, there's the plot. Now, Robocop vs the Terminator is basically a platform shoot-'em-up, quite similar to Contra, but a lot better, with more weapons and more action-adventure elements. However, it is a bit simpler than most action-adventure games, so you can focus on the action. Now, Robocop, he can just shoot and jump, but I suppose more moves would be unnecessary. You begin with Robocop's traditional handgun that is effective against weaker enemies, but in later levels you acquire several stronger weapons, such as grenade throwers, lasers and rockets and etc, and you can also find Ed 209's weapon. I like that. The levels are divided into Robocop levels and in the future levels. In the first 5 levels you fight in Robocop's universe, and frankly the levels reminded me of the movies. The first 2 are the streets of Detroit. And the boss here is a Terminator disguised as a human. He's identical to Arnie from the first Terminator film, I have to say. Then you go to Delta City construction site, and here you fight the large robot from Robocop 2. Then there is a factory similar to the one of the first Robocop film, where you fight a small tank robot. The 5th level is in the OCP headquarters, and it's here you fight the best boss in my opinion, Ed 209 in its full glory. And for me, Ed 209 has the best appearance compared to any game that included him. After you finish the 5 levels, you go to the future, and here you will travel through several futuristic levels to reach your final goal, Skynet. The bosses here are mostly upgraded Terminators, but the boss in level 8 is a large, impressive robot. For me, the game is a bit challenging, but with practice you'll have no problem in finishing it. So, what did I think of the game? Well, firstly, the graphics, they're certainly the strongest part of the game. Large, detailed sprites, especially Robocop or the Terminators, they're very impressive. The levels are well drawn and varied as well. I can say that the graphics have a movie feel rather than a comic feel. For me, if you compare this version to the SNES game of the same name, you'll understand what I mean with regards to the graphics. And we'll have a look at that next. And the graphics, well, they're also very gory. When you shoot a human thug, he doesn't just disappear, but the screen fills with blood. It's brutal. I suppose the only minor criticism I'd have is that there was a slight disappointment of the graphics lacking digitised images, certainly between the levels. But it certainly didn't put me off the game. And the sound, well, that also follows the quality of the graphics. Really impressive when you consider it's a Genesis and not a SNES here. The sound effects are certainly the strongest part. It's like making war in your room, literally. And the music is really good as well, action-packed, it fits the game perfectly. So overall, alongside titles such as Lion King, Aladdin or Mickey Mania, this is one of the best licenses on the Genesis. It looks and sounds great and plays like a real arcade game. It certainly has plenty of variety in this game. I highly recommend this game to Robocop fans or shoot 'em up fans in general. It's a good game. Right, now we're on to the SNES version. And as we saw, the Sega Genesis game was good, even bordering on excellent. However, something went terribly wrong with its SNES debut. In nearly every category it pales in comparison to its Sega counterpart. Now, the SNES version was made by Interplay and is based loosely on the events of the Miller-Simpson comic, with comic-style introductions in the early stages. And I have to say, I did like that. So, the plot of the story goes as follows. In the future, humanity fights a losing battle against Skynet and its army of Terminators. A resistance fighter named Flo discovers the Skynet's technology is based on the cybernetic policeman known as Robo Cop. Now Flo, well, she travels to the past to destroy Robocop before Skynet is created, but instead sets in motion the events she was trying to prevent. Robocop, well, he must now clean up the mess that he unwillingly created. The story, it unfolds between levels using comic book style cutscenes, but sadly, that goes away once you reach the future. Although they are based on the same source material, the two versions of Robocop vs the Terminator are distinct games. Okay, the framework is largely the same, but how they put the pieces together differ. Robocop has his pistol by default and can carry an additional weapon. This version is more restrained in terms of secondary weapons until its second half, unfortunately. These include Ed 209's railgun, plasma rifles, seeker missiles and the combo gun. It's a change that goes hand in hand with the game's focus. This is still an action game, but there is a heavier focus on platforming. And I have to say, in this respect, the game's faults become noticeable. I mean, Robocop is sluggish in his movements and at times clumsy as well. It's certainly not as bad as Robocop 2 and Robocop 3 on the NES, but still not where it should be. The controls can be unresponsive, which makes the latter parts of the game aggravating. Collision detection is suspect also. Robocop falls through platforms and refuses to grab pipes consistently. Not to mention that hit detection is also dodgy. I've had multiple shots pass through enemies several times in a row. And considering how strong the Terminators are in the later levels, it becomes incredibly frustrating very fast. I think this game clearly needed another pass to iron out these issues. And if they did, well, the framework for a decent game is certainly here. But there are other problems that hold Robocop vs the Terminator back. The Super Nintendo game is longer than its Sega equivalent and not for the better. The game is repetitive and lingers in one place longer than it should. Once you enter the future, the environments are identical for multiple levels in a row. It would not be an issue if they were at least interesting to look at, but I have to say they are bland. Enemy variety is also very limited. I hope you like Terminators because that's all you're going to see for the majority of this game. I suppose the one interesting diversion is a vehicle-based Mode 7 3D stage that tasks you with killing multiple hunter-killers. But it's not enough to save the game, I have to say. This is a difficult game for many of the reasons I previously described and many more. Your weapons are weak, Terminators take far too long to kill, and if you linger too long, they respawn. Life power-ups and extra lives are common, but you will blow through them very quickly. And there's also no checkpoint, so death sends you back into the beginning of the level. Very frustrating, and some of the later stages are unbearably long, making this especially cruel. The difficulty spike is not as severe as the Genesis game, but it comes close. At least that game was good enough that it was worth using cheat codes to see its content. I can't say the same for this game here though. So for me, the Genesis game is the original, and this version uses some of its backgrounds and environments, yet they lose something in translation. The SNES version of Robocop vs the Terminator has a vibrant look that is more akin to the comic. The grittiness that made the Sega game so distinct is gone and replaced by a generic colour palette, more in line with the other SNES titles. It is a damn shame as the game looks fantastic. It reminds me of Mindscape's version of Terminator, which is not really good company to be in. The sprites are large, but the animation is poor, especially on Robocop himself. While I do not particularly care about blood and gore, its absence here is notable. Both these properties were incredibly bloody, so seeing enemies poof into a cloud of smoke is comical. So this was disappointing all around. I do not know what happened here. I respect Virgin and Interplay's attempt at creating a unique version of Robocop vs the Terminator for the SNES, but it is not good, and while it's not an outright terrible game, it should have been better. So here we are, onto the Game Boy version. The Game Boy version is a standard platformer for the system that stars a vaguely Robocop-ish object as he moves through what might be the Mushroom Kingdom. Robocop must destroy various enemies while looking for the level exit, from various criminals in Detroit to advanced robotic probes, Terminators and flying hunter-killers in the OCP labs and the future. He is armed with a simple gun which can be upgraded once to a 3-directional scatter shot. A single hit means that the gun upgrade is lost though. And life energy can be refilled through power-ups, and extra lives are also available in the game. So this potential smash of a license turns out to be not only very average, but a tragic waste of a half-decent idea. I mean, look at the graphics, they're just dull. The backgrounds are dull and the sprites are hardly recognisable. The gameplay is also very stodgy. And the speed of the game, or lack of it, is largely at fault, but the irresponsible controls don't help one bit either. Sure, the challenge is pretty good, but after level 2 of this dodgy gameplay, you stop caring. If the gameplay was sorted out, then this could have been an okay game. However, as it stands, it's pretty boring. Now, the Game Gear edition is really a pared down take on the Genesis game. I suppose, on the positive, it mimics the action from the 16-bit version remarkably well, with a healthy amount of missions and satisfying weaponry. In the level's design's heavy use of vertically is engaging, and there's many secret areas to hunt down for helpful items and weapons. I suppose the game does allow you to play slowly and methodically, or brazenly reckless, in part due to the 8-bit fire, which gives you total control. Another positive is the great use of voice samples that are surprisingly clear and add personality to the game's overall presentation. However, in saying all that, there is slowdown, which is rampant from the get-go, and it can be very distracting when the action suddenly speeds up and down. And a number of the stages end rather abruptly due to this port omitting several boss battles that were found in the 16-bit version. And boy, that camera does snap around in a disorientating fashion, likely to overcompensate for the reduced visibility of the smaller screen. So I suppose the Game Gear edition is okay, but nothing special, an average game. This was also the case for the Master System version, basically the same as the Game Gear. All the comments I said there is relevant to here as well. Although I did notice that enemy bullets tend to blur into the background, especially during boss fights, resulting in sprite flicker. Let's have a look at the game. In 1999, Titus Software acquired the rights for Robo Cop video games. By 2001, Titus had begun development of a Robocop game for the Game Boy Color and also the Game Boy Advance, with an expected release in the fourth quarter of 2001. The Game Boy Color version was released later that year, and again we need to help our Tin Man make his way through the crime-riddled streets of Detroit, shooting anyone who looks like he might deserve it. The gameplay is stretched out across 8 gigantic levels that include indoor and outdoor locations. In the action, well, it's balanced between arresting the bad guys and solving several taxing mental problems. And like a real crime fighter, you must distinguish between good and bad and not break any of Robocop's primary directives. Uphold the law, protect the innocent, and defend the public trust. There are also 7 weapons available to Robocop throughout the game, and each weapon can be upgraded 3 times. Even though you have an impressive arsenal of upgradable weapons available, you'll have to be skillful and use cunning tactics if you want to defeat the MIND. I quite liked this game. Robocop offered a good balance of graphics and challenging gameplay, and successfully carries on the Robocop universe. Let's have a quick look. In May 2002, Titus unveiled more screenshots of the Game Boy Advance version, which was expected for release in October 2002, but the game was ultimately cancelled. That's a bit of a shame really, because the Game Boy version features identical gameplay to the 1988 Robocop game, so let's have a look at that. Inspired by the films rather than directly based upon any of them, and whispered in the same company as such fantastically terrible offerings as Superman 64, Robocop was developed and published by Titus in 2003 for the Microsoft Windows, PlayStation 2 and the Xbox. And also the following year, Titus released a GameCube version of the game. This 2003 game features a new plot which is not featured in any of the films. Crime is up in Neo-Detroit due to the rapid proliferation of a new designer drug, Brain Drain, and the efforts of the crime lord William Nex to control its profitable distribution. Meanwhile, a mayoral race is heating up and getting dirty. And of course, Mega Corporation OCP's role in all of this is almost certain, but also unclear. So, our Robocop will have to get to the bottom of all these mysteries through 9 missions. Gameplay is handled as a typical first-person shooter with various Robocop enhancements. His HUD is projected on screen and points out available targets. The player can mark up to 3 targets with a lock-on button, who Robo will then auto-aim at in sequence. And there's also thermal vision, which can be activated to see through walls in a limited distance. Multiple weapons are also available, from the signature automatic pistol to missile launchers and energy weapons. Objectives are given for each mission, from rescuing hostages to finding clues. And clues can be examined after each mission to explore the story, which is also updated through TV news breaks in the style of films. And if the player can target and shoot an enemy's pistol, they will surrender and can be arrested. And should Robocop kill a hostage or a surrendered enemy, they will take damage, forcing the player to follow Robocop's ethics and prime directives. 2003's Robocop was an innovative first-person shooter, but summarily undone by terrible slow movement. And I do know Robocop is a plodding chap, but this was beyond silly. I mean, it was sluggish targeting, too many bullet sponge enemies, a lack of ammo, and little or no cover to use in this game. With nothing else really to recommend, this absolute stinker, Robocop's 2003 incarnation, is widely recognised as one of the worst video game tie-ins of all time. And this certainly came across the game reviews, where the game received mostly negative reviews by critics. GameSpot rated it 2.2 out of 10, and the official Xbox magazine UK rated it a mediocre 5.9 out of 10. Gamerfeed gave it 2 out of 5, and the Xbox magazine also gave it 2 out of 10, and NTSC UK rated it 3 out of 10. Ouch! And finally, the Scandinavian magazine Gamer Reactor gave the game 1 out of 10 and called it the worst video game since Superman 64, which was also released by Titus Software. So, there you go, Robocop 2003's release was a travesty of epic proportions. Pish poor.
Thank you for your cooperation.
Right, so here we are, we're on Robocop, which was released in 2004. In this game, it's a side-scrolling action platform game. It was released for mobile phones and it's based on the 1987 film. And developer Digital Bridges announced the game in May 2004 as part of an agreement with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer to produce video games based on the studio's film franchises. Robocop was released in North America in October 2004. So, Digital Bridges' Robocop is based on the popular 80s movie about a police officer who is half human, half machine. However, the inspiration for the game comes from the first game, to bear the Robocop name, an arcade side-scroller from Data East. Digital Bridges' interpretation is a great looking title, not to mention a fun game. Robocop starts out on the streets of old Detroit. And before Robo can zero on in OCP, he must clean up the crumbling city. Members of Clarence's gang are much more plentiful in the game, but are just as well armed. The enemies are a bit more aggressive than the average action title, making it important not to rush into any battles. The generic thug carries a machine gun, but other enemies throw grenades or, most impressively, carry flamethrowers. bad guys do a good job of hiding behind boxes, peeking out of windows and firing from hard to reach places. There is also the occasional robotic enemy, including a floating turret and a wall laser. Enemies usually require about 3 hits, and human enemies sometimes give up after a couple of shots. Robocop can then apprehend them for extra points instead of killing them. Just like the movie had a little something to say about police brutality, Robocop lets players choose whether or not to arrest surrounding thugs or mow them down without a second thought. However, I have to say arresting the thugs is worth more points than killing them, but there isn't a huge incentive to get a high score. The goal is really to survive. Most of the missions last a few minutes, and aside from defeating an occasional boss character, the goal is to save all the hostages. Enemies often stay close to them, but luckily hostages can't be hit by your bullets. Saving the hostage rewards you with baby food, which Robocop uses as fuel to refill his energy tank. And Robo also benefits from picking up power-ups of his own, including bigger weapons which offer greater shot frequencies. And yes, the Ed 209 does make an appearance. And this biped bot with a bad attitude, he does try to stop Robo from completing his mission. I mean, that Ed 209 is probably as much an icon of the 80s, and you cannot help but smile when you see it walk on screen. Of course, you'll stop smiling as soon as it opens fire at you. The game screen contributes to the arcade flavour of Robocop. Information is limited to the top of the screen, where you'll find info on your current weapon, ammunition, score and energy. And there's also storyline text, which is limited to level breaks featuring mock newscasts. For me, Robocop looks like a good NES game. The sprites are drawn with good detail, especially Robocop in the Ed 209. I mean, graphically, Robocop is gorgeous. The shine on the hero's armour, the death animations of the enemies, and even the nearly flawless title screen compete with the original arcade game. And the graphics of the Ed 209 is pretty good. I mean, that beast takes up a good chunk of the screen and moves with a grace seldom seen in a handheld. The basic thugs are slight variations of each other, but they look imposing enough. The backdrops are detailed with old Detroit looking like the hellhole it was in the movie, and the old steel plant evokes memories of that final showdown with Body Gear. In regards to the sound is a notch below the graphics, but it's still impressive. And I'm pleased that Robocop theme is intact, so much so that fans who forgot about the Cyborg movie may find themselves humming along. Okay, there is no game music, which is a pity, but the sound effects are on point. And Robocop has a nice difficulty curve, though novice gamers may be fooled by the initial levels. Crates can be destroyed to create new shot angles, and explosive drums can be shot to kill the surrounding enemies. A lot of thought was put into the level design, and it will probably take the average player an hour or so to beat Robocop, if not longer, simply because it usually takes a few tries to master a level. Fans of the arcade game, and especially the original arcade title, will enjoy Robocop. Okay, it might not be the longest game on the platform, but its great graphics and gameplay make for a fun overall experience. It's a solid action game with a decent amount of difficulty, and fans will probably replay the game at least once to repeat that showdown with that Ed 209. I was really impressed by the visual style and how everything looked just right, and was surprised by how much the theme music evoked the feeling of the actual movie. Right, now we're on to Robocop, the official game, which was released in 2014. And this game is a free-to-play shooter game developed and published by Glue Mobile for the iOS and Android. The game's a tie-in of sorts to the risible remake of the original movie, which nobody asked for. 2014's Robocop was developed exclusively for mobile platforms, and well, the overzealous approach to squeezing your wallet for all it's worth with a range of costly microtransactions that don't so much complement the game, but rather exist at its core. And I suppose that was pretty emblematic of similar offerings from that period of time. I mean, there's no better way to steal money than free enterprise, I guess. Anyway, beyond its ultra grabby and cynical pay-to-win sensibilities, 2014's Robocop also happened to be a resultly dull third-person cover shooter where its titular protagonist would blast through waves of machines and other such enemies in a holographic training simulation. Robocop can use various weapons throughout the game's missions and can also take cover behind objects. But overall, the 2014 Robocop remake was not what fans wanted from this series. It looks sleeker, but the characters lacks the recognisable heaviness that made the original look so iconic. It lacked a real tie-in game, and instead was supported by a mobile title, which lacked anything compelling other than being a quick, put-together shooting gallery, which also required a microtransaction heavy free-to-play model, so any of its faults were exacerbated by the need to grind unless one forked over more money. So, there you go, I would give this game a miss.
Tonight's top story. War rages on in Detroit. A nuke floods the streets as a new gang leader emerges.
Yo, look at these beauties, huh? Break the glass and move it to the web.
A media break exclusive gives you access to how the police deal with this threat. Over to you, Cindy.
Good evening, Casey. Indeed, the new guy has united all the gangs to take control of the streets. But we are not alone.
Reinforcements have arrived.
Every day, the brave men and women of the OCP police force go out and fight to keep us safe. Tonight, thanks to Robo Cop, we'll show you how. Because it's important to remember the nuke crisis seemed unstoppable, but not to Robo Cop. He is the perfect policeman, versatile with a wide variety of weapons, ready to defend us with OCP's cutting-edge technology. And he's not alone. You're okay there, Murphy? The OCP police have shown us time and time again that we all can make a difference.
Flying bags detected.
So remember, whoever is behind this rampage, wherever he may hide, RoboCop is equipped to find him and stop his reign of terror using all the tools of the law. Wait, something's happening. I'm told RoboCop is being called to action. Any warnings to the bad guys?
It seems there will be trouble. Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Nice, such a great trailer. Right, so here we are, Robocop Rogue City, which was released in 2023. And this game, it features an original storyline based on the first 3 Robocop films. The game was developed by Teon and was published by Nacon in partnership with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, which holds the rights to the franchise. And these 3 companies worked very closely together to ensure that the game was faithful to the original films. And the development team watched them multiple times to incorporate their satirical aspect, especially that of the first film. Now, the game was developed using the Unreal Engine number 5, and the original Robocop actor Peter Weller returned to provide his voice and likeness for the game. And Robocop's sluggish movements are also incorporated, despite first-person shooters generally using swift gameplay. And it's also worth mentioning that Robocop Rogue City is the first console-based Robocop video game since 2003's Robocop. Rogue City was initially scheduled to release in June 2023, but this was later pushed back 3 months before being delayed even further. The game was eventually released for the PlayStation 5, Windows and the Xbox Series on the 2nd of November 2023. And there was also a version for the Nintendo Switch which was announced alongside the first gameplay footage in 2022, but this was officially cancelled in the 20th October 2023. Shame. As we have seen, there have been multiple attempts to resurrect this series over the years, including that ill-fated reboot in 2014, but nothing has captured the excellent arcade feel that struck a chord when the series first debuted. And that's what is most impressive about Robocop Rogue City. It's not just a solid first-person shooter set in the Robocop universe. Developer Teon absolutely nails the look and feel of its film inspiration in ways that nothing else has. It's a good game and the most authentic adaptation the series has ever seen. Fine, the story itself is nothing groundbreaking. You know, a bad guy who looks like he's fated to be thrown off the top of Nakatomi Plaza in Die Hard is up to no good and you need to stop him. OCP is still an evil corporation and drug-fueled gangs rule the streets. I mean, you know what I mean. If you've ever seen an old-school action movie set in a city, you'll know what to expect. Robocop himself is also treading familiar ground, with what remains of Officer Alex Murphy still struggling with figuring out the line between man and machine within himself, this time with the help of a therapist. That's the most compelling thematic thread, and it felt like it could have been more interesting to explore. Unfortunately, it exists exclusively in dialogue options and cutscenes, with no ramifications in gameplay. That's too bad, that's a bit of a shame, as it relegates us to being an observer in this introspective crisis, rather than sharing in it. It also makes some degree of sense, in that Rogue City is primarily a first-person shooter, about blowing through hordes of criminal scum, but it's also smart about focusing on what makes the titular character unique. Now Robo, our Tin Man, he's a walking tank. The slow plodding bounce of his gait with a heavy thunk accompanying each footfall makes him feel like a juggernaut. The street gangs, bikers and mercenaries that make up the bulk of the enemy fodder aren't anywhere as close as powerful as he is, and it is so much fun to walk right at these evildoers, shrugging off their small arms of fire and shredding them to literal pieces with Robo's iconic Auto 9 machine pistol. I mean, it's exceptionally violent, and it should be as well. Arms and heads explode like pressurised watermelons, bodies tumble and ragdoll all around, and enemies scream about lost limbs. There are often a lot of enemies on screen at once, and turning them into a shower of crimson is a frequent and entertaining occurrence. I mean, I'm sure it may not be appropriate for all ages, but it is true to the R-rated source material, and it's here it is racketed up to a degree that is humorous and well over the top. There's also a decent variety of enemies, including some that can make more than a dent in Robo, like snipers, heavy troopers, and the infamous big boy Ed 209, and those present opportunities to get more strategic with your approach than simply charging in and busting heads. You can also pick up and use guns dropped by the enemies like shotguns and assault rifles, though their ammo is limited while the Auto 9 is not. You can also grab and throw a lot of things like explosive barrels, motorcycles and unlucky henchmen, which is both hilarious and not to mention effective. The wonderfully destructive environment plays a key role in the combat design too. Sometimes it's purely aesthetic, as monitors explode, papers scatter, and shattered cement rains down from damaged structures. Other times it's strategic, as you blast apart the cover your foes are trying to hide behind. The most exciting is the breach opportunities, pre-designated spots where Robo smashes through doors or compromise walls and take the bad guys by surprise, offering you a few seconds of slow motion to take out enemies before they can return fire or shoot their hostages. This translation of a 40-year-old action movie into a game is so detailed and strictly loyal to the films that it's almost resembling something fan-made, and I mean that in the best way. There's very little artistic license taken, favouring nearly one-to-one translations from the source material across the board. Robocop looks and sounds like his original self, complete with Peter Weller's piercing gaze under his helmet and voice reprising his best known role. And Officer Anne Lewis is there as Robocop's partner and confidant. And I have to say, she looks exactly like actress Nancy Allen, who portrayed her. And whether it's the Detroit West Precinct office, the OCP corporate office, or the main streets of Detroit, Rogue City nails the look and feel of the movies to an impressive degree. The entire 80s-ness of the presentation is brilliant. The heavy use of synth in the soundtracks fits it to a T. The dark, grimy streets and mohawk sporting gangs that were central fictional goons throughout the decade are present in force. There are CRT monitors in all the cubises, a green wireframe HUD, and police cruisers that look an awful like the old Ford Taurusas that were used in the movies. There's small touches also, like the visible scan lines when you zoom in and aim down your weapon sights, which also highlights enemies so you can pick them off through smoke and darkness. It's exactly the right vibe. Absolutely well done, brilliant. The appeal to nostalgia is strong, and that can have a significant impact on how much mileage you get out of this. As a pure shooter, Rogue City isn't overly ambitious, but it's a lot of fun to play even if you don't know anything about the series. However, if you grew up with the Robocop or recently watched the movies, then it's a choke full of references and nods that add a lot to the experience. I mean, exploding the ground of a baddie is a silly bit over-the-top violence on its surface, but it's so much more entertaining if you know that it was actually pulled directly from the film. But in saying that, at the same time, this isn't the most technically impressive game when held up next to the flashy big budget adventures we're regularly treated to these days. I mean, the textures are kind of flat and the lighting effects are minimalistic, plus a lot of the gang members' voices are extremely similar to one another, but there's something B-movie quality that makes it more forgivable, if not a bit charming. Still, another coat of polish would have gone a long way, especially in cutscenes where all of those issues are more apparent in close-ups. More than once I had audio and video get out of sync, had frozen faces accompany dialogue, and I had total game crashes on 2 occasions also. So I suppose they could have sorted that out. And the levels alternate between very linear A to B stages, in which you charge through enemies looking for the new guy in town who's taken over the nuke business in the aftermath of Robocop 2, and self-contained sandbox areas that put the cop in Robocop. And as you walk around the main streets of Detroit, you'll come across side missions focused on Robo's prime directives of serve the public trust, protect the innocent and uphold the law. Some are simple, such as having you issue fines for small infractions. Sure, it sounds kind of silly, but it's a fun bit of role-playing to see an oversized truck parked on the curb, leak on oil, and then you slap a ticket on the windshield. Other side missions are more expansive, and are the sort of contained side stories that feel worth playing on their own merits. One subplot spanning multiple quests has you helping to reform a drug addict turned informant. Seemingly mundane things like helping him return a watch he stole, or picking out a VHS tape from a video store, they're all poignant palate cleansers from the brutal action sequences, although I have to say there are certainly a few good shootouts along the way also. And completing all the side quests and main story took me probably about over 20 hours, a pretty solid runtime for a single player only campaign. A simple leveling system does a good job of offering a basic sense of progression as you go, feeding skill points into things like increasing damage resistance or extending the slow motion time frames, as well as some non-combat skills that open up new dialogue options or allow you to open safes. Every few upgrades spent on a particular skill add a perk, like a rapid dash maneuver or armour that reflects small arms fire back at enemies. Finding bits of evidence scattered around, reading notes and completing bonus objectives are good sources of XP, giving a nice incentive to go off the beaten path in the open areas. So, for me in summary, Robocop Rogue City is a pitch perfect throwback to the action movies of the 80s. It's over-the-top violence with charm, largely well put together but rough on the edges. Most importantly, it is a fun way to spend time in a beloved fictional universe that doesn't overstay its welcome. Blasting at goons as an unstoppable walking machine remains as extremely entertaining as it seemed on the big screen, thanks in part to an impressive commitment to capturing the look and feel of the original film. And mixing in elements like routine police work and side quests does a great job changing the pace too. Even if it's not the best example of visual fidelity, and also prone to some bugs along the way, that love of Robocop absolutely shines through. This is a solid B-movie of a video game, which is exactly what the source of material demands. Excellent.
Torch heads will burn you alive!
And finally, there's a standalone expansion titled Robocop Rogue City Unfinished Business, which is scheduled for release in the Q3 2025. And in this expansion, Robocop must infiltrate Omni Tower, a massive complex controlled by a group of elite mercenaries. The expansion will also introduce new weapons and flashback missions that allow players to play as Alex Murphy before he became Robocop.
Surrender, or there will be trouble.
You're going down!
Trouble, then.
Right, now it's time for me to rank all these 42 games that we just looked at into a top 10. So let's have a look, starting off with number 10, the Amiga version of Robocop. Apart from the weird voice speech in the game, the Amiga version of Robocop is a pretty good game. Sure, the border certainly makes the game look and feel smaller, but this version does follow the arcade game more than the other 8-bit versions. There are colourful graphics and good animation. I also like the brief cutscenes showing news reports using digitised actors from the movie. Perhaps the only downside where the Amiga can certainly do better lies with the music, but apart from that, it's an okay game. It's a good game in fact. At number 9, it's the Game Boy version, which is voted my best 8-bit version. The music is good and quite catchy. The graphics are well done with good Robocop animation. Everything stands out pretty well on the little Game Boy screen. It's a pretty good version. I was pleasantly surprised playing Robocop 2 on the Atari ST. It shares elements of both the ZX Spectrum and the GX4000 version, but with all new levels. Okay, it didn't look like an arcade game which the Apple pulled off perfectly. I would also say that the music is okay, but not as good as the Amiga version, and the sounds are certainly subpar. However, I really love the smooth animation on the small ST character sprite, and I think it actually plays better compared to the Amiga version. I love that the last few levels are almost a repro of the Amiga version too, and because it's all vertical scroll boss fights, it runs fast. I would say the Amiga version has the looks, but the ST version, more of a personality. Very close, but I'm giving this to the Atari ST. Right, number 7, and that goes to the SNES game of Robocop 3. In this game, it is short, but adrenaline filled with incredible difficulty. If you're looking for a challenge, look no further. But in saying all that, it is beatable with practice. It's a lost gem, this game, and very underrated. It's a good game. Nice. And at number 6, well, it's the DOS version of Robocop 3. Now for me, this is the better version compared to the Atari ST and the Amiga. Much improved visuals and game music and sound effects. Movement is also smoother. It's a better version. At At number 5, it goes to Robocop on the Game Boy Color. This game offers a good balance of graphics and challenging gameplay, and successfully carries on the Robocop universe. Portable shooting fun, this game is a fine game. Right, number 4 is the arcade version of Robocop 2. It's a little bit shallow, but I still found it to be fun. Alongside titles like Lion King, Aladdin or Mickey Mania, Robocop vs. the Terminator is one of the best licenses on the Sega Genesis. It looks and sounds great and plays like a real arcade game. It also has variety. I highly recommend Robocop fans or shoot 'em up fans to this game in general. No surprises, but the number 2 vote is the arcade version of Robocop, which is a blueprint for all the other games to follow. I have such fond memories playing this in the arcade. It certainly offered a good fix for running and gunning action. That's just good enough for me. And at number 1, we've just seen it, it's Robocop Rogue City, which is a pitch-perfect throwback to the action movies of the 80s. It truly is a solid B movie of a video game, which is exactly what we're after. I just look forward to Robocop Rogue City Unfinished Business. So there you go folks, that's it, it's a wrap. Gee whiz, I hope you liked this video. It certainly took a tremendous amount of my time to bring this to you. And I have to say, you're all superstars if you've watched this video to the very end. Wow, what can I say? Thank you very, very much. Your support is just so much appreciated, thank you. And I know, and I'm pretty sure, some of you may agree or even disagree with my thoughts of these games. It's totally fine if you disagree, as all of this is based on my opinion and experiences. However, I am very interested in your opinions and experiences on any of these games, so please share your thoughts. Now, finally, please remember to press that like button. Share also, that would be good for my channel. And even better still, please subscribe to my channel. Dead or alive, you're coming with me. See yous later folks, bye bye.